Hello, and welcome back to Headspace Diaries, where we explore psychology and related sciences from a student's point of view. This podcast is purely for educational purposes and it does not replace a professional opinion. Today, we're going to be talking about how habits are formed. So, before we talk about how they're formed, let's just take a quick look at what habits are. A dictionary definition of a habit is that it is a settled or regular tendency or practice, especially one that is hard to give up. In other words, it is a learned behavior that becomes automatic. And when we think about these habits that we have, psychologists estimate that around 40% of our day to day actions are habitual. They are part of our routine. If you think about it, we have a lot of habits, such as getting up in the morning and brushing our teeth. For some people, they have lunch, dinner, and breakfast at a particular time of the day. Some people drink water first thing in the morning. Some people have a habit of going for a walk or going for a run. Some people have the habit of showering at a particular time of day. And this is part of our routine. So we have a predefined way of how we're going to spend our time. And if you think about it, you'll also notice that it's very automatic. A lot of people, they go to work, they come back, they relax, they unwind, and this is very automatic. You don't spend a lot of time thinking about what I'm going to do after I do this particular activity. So when we look at it, it's part of our routine in a way. Now, as to how habits are formed and how long it takes to form a habit, we'll notice that habits form through repetition and learning. So there's a concept called the habit loop. And in the habit loop, there are three major components. One is cue, next is routine, and then it's reward. So let's take a simple habit such as brushing our teeth. Okay, the cue can be any trigger that initiates the habit, like time of day, such as morning times. We brush our teeth. Routine can be the behavior or the action that follows the cue. Since it's morning, I have to brush my teeth. And reward is the positive reinforcement that you receive after completing the routine. It doesn't have to be a physical positive reinforcement, it can be a feeling of accomplishment or satisfaction that follows the behavior. So, in our life, you'll often notice that the first time we do things, such as tying our shoes, our actions are conscious and effortful. But with repeated practice, it becomes automatic. That is, we offload our tasks to autopilot and we free up our mental energy for other things. And habits, they are formed through repetition and learning, right? So they're a form of associative learning where we form mental links between stimuli and response, especially when there's a reward that follows the behavior. As for how long it takes to form a habit, many of you must have at least thought of the number 21. Because this is a popular myth, and we keep going back to the first episode where we did a myth busting session, and there are a lot of myths that surround psychology. And this is one of them. It's a popular myth that it takes exactly 21 days to establish a habit. If you recall from our first episode, we will notice that myths in psychology are very convincing. It's actually widely known, but scientifically, it's untrue. The real number can be anywhere between 18 and 254 days, with an average of 66 days for a new behavior to become automatic. Now, there are several theories for understanding habits. The most popular ones are the theory of classical conditioning and operant conditioning. So, we will talk a little bit about classical and operant conditioning in our coming episodes. Let's just take a very brief look at what it is right now. Classical conditioning, it was given by Ivan Pavlov, who was a Russian physiologist. He conducted this famous experiment with a dog by pairing food with the sound of a bell to measure the salivation of the dog. only to find that the dog salivated to just the sound of the bell even when the food was not given. So this led him to his famous experiment and eventually to the conclusion of conditioning. Similarly, if you take a brief look at B.F. Skinner's research on operant conditioning, he demonstrated that behaviors followed by rewards became more likely to recur. He worked primarily with rats and pigeons to establish operant conditioning. We'll get into more of these experiments in the coming episode, I promise. Notably, habits, they don't require reward to stay effective forever. Once a habit is ingrained, the context cue can trigger the action even if the original reward is diminished or gone. In other words, we may continue a habit simply because it is our routine. So how do we intentionally form a new habit? The answer is simple: consistency. Consistency is key, and this might be a cliche, but it is, to form a new habit. It takes effort and practice through repetitions to form a new habit. Another question that we often have related to habits is, how do we get rid of the bad habits? Research suggests the following tips for breaking negative habits and forming new and more positive ones. Firstly, finding ways to lower your stress level. Because many negative habits such as smoking or overeating, they are simply responses to stress. So lowering your stress level makes you less inclined to continue the habit. And some simple ways to achieve this is by practicing mindfulness or going on walks. Another tip is to be aware of your negative habits and avoid the cues that lead to this habit. So for me, using my phone excessively is a habit that I'm working on reducing. I try to avoid cues that lead to phone usage by making my phone less accessible to me, or setting a harder password, hiding apps that I spend the most time on. Next, we should replace the old habit with a new one. Some positive habits to replace are just going for walks, gratitude journaling, reading, decluttering. There are a host of alternative habits to choose from, and depending on what we're trying to replace, we can choose something suitable for ourselves. I'm trying to replace my habit of using the phone with more productive, more intentional habits, such as reading, listening to a podcast, solving puzzles, and even trying yoga. So there you go. That's everything I've learned about habits so far. And if you're trying to replace a negative habit with a positive one, then I wish you luck. You're on the right path to achieving productivity and wellness, so good for you. And I would love to know what kinds of bad habits that you have and what you're trying to replace it with. So share it down in the comment section. And if you like today's podcasts, please leave a like and make sure to follow and share it with someone you love. Thank you for listening to Headspace Diaries, and I hope you'll join me in the next episode as we continue this journey.